Yo, what's going on, guys? It's C-Brab. Welcome back to another MLB The Show 24 video. In this one, we're going to be going through all 30 Team Affinity bosses for Season 1, Chapter 1. I'm going to be giving you all my opinions on which cards I think are the best, which ones you should be adding to your team immediately, and which ones you should be going after first. I'm going to be giving each card a general tier list style rating, so S, A, B, and C, just to kind of give you a context of how good I think they are. A lot of these cards are going to be the backbone of your team as you start to build up your squad from scratch, and honestly there's not a whole lot of bad cards in this set, so a lot of guys you're going to want to add and try out. Starting off in the AL East, we have Cedric Mullins, and if you played this game for multiple years, you know how good Cedric Mullins cards are. This is a high A tier, potentially S tier card for me right out of the gate. 95-85 versus righties is actually pretty high at this point in the year, with the overalls being as low as they are. Also, with the lower overalls, it's hard to find an outfielder that hits well and also can have gold defense and high 70s speed. That's what you get from this card. I think the best position for this card is actually left field because of his arm, but overall really good card. Next is Kevin Youkilis, and this division is stacked. I think this card has the potential to be one of the most underrated cards in all of Team Affinity in Season 1 Chapter 1. His hitting stats are pretty good as is, but if you notice, he has 119 clutch. Clutch is going to be influencing your PCI size when runners are in scoring position. Almost maxed out clutch from an 89 overall is pretty crazy, especially considering the hits per 9 and pitching clutch that you'll see from most pitchers at this point. This card is going to give you a massive PCI with runners in scoring position. It cannot be understated. And even when there's nobody in scoring position, this card still has really good hitting stats. Also good positional versatility, first base, third base, and right field. I'd probably stick him in the corner infield. And really good quirks too, carries dead red. Overall, probably one of the first surprises of the video, but I think this is an S tier card. Next is Gary Sanchez, a legend in this game. This is another S tier card for me. Catchers right away at launch are pretty hard to come by, and this one can really hit. Obviously, 43 contact left and 54 clutch are the huge weaknesses of this card, but if you can dodge those situations, this is one of the best hitters you'll have in your lineup in general, and he's playing catcher. He also has 97 arm strength and the catcher pop time quirk, so basically nobody's going to be able to steal on you. To have a catcher that's this offensive minded and also be able to throw runners out is insanely valuable. Definitely S tier. Next is Evan Longoria, who I'm going to rate in B tier. I feel like a lot of this card's overall value comes from his defensive attributes, and personally I care more about offensive attributes than defensive attributes at third base typically. If you love your third baseman to have insane fielding, this card could definitely bump up for you, but for me the contact is just too low and the clutch isn't pulling it up enough. And finally we have Sean Green, who I'm gonna rate in A tier. He's pretty comparable to Cedric Mullins in that he's a little bit better versus righties across the board, but is lacking in contact versus left. Overall, just a solid card, not much to say. I think it's good. I like Sean Green cards in general, and also good quirks as well. Also has dead red. So for the AL East, we had 2 S tier cards, 2 A tier cards, and a B tier card. I think your first pick from this division should either be Gary Sanchez or Kevin Youkilis. I think most people are going to go with Gary Sanchez, especially with how scarce catcher usually is. After that, I would go Cedric Mullins and Sean Green, and then Evan Longoria last. On to the NL East now, and David Justice, and another card that I think is super underrated. I'm going to rate this card high A tier, potentially S tier. Just like with Kevin Youkilis, he has amazing clutch. In fact, his clutch is maxed out, so with runners in scoring position, his PCI is going to be gigantic, and his base hitting stats are really good. Really all he's missing is power versus left. The only reason I'm not rating him S tier is because of the defense. Obviously, the best spot for a card like this would be DH, although silver fielding with 50 speed is really not that bad considering we're in a state of 89 overalls. Honestly, I don't imagine a lot of people using this card, but I think that they should. And also, look at his quirks. He has like everything. Dead red, breaking ball hitter, pinch hitter, just 9 quirks is insane. Next is Giancarlo Stanton, who I'm going to rate in S tier. This card's main weakness is contact versus right, and it's not even really that low. You're one parallel away from getting gold defense in right field as well, so the defense is going to be pretty good. Obviously, people often don't like hitting with tall players in this game, especially when they have low vision, so that's something to consider. But if you can get past that, I think this is one of the best cards in Team Affinity right now. Next is David Wright, who I'm going to rate in high A tier as well. Another card with massive clutch. The real knock on this card is the lack of power. The other 2 cards we've gone over that had huge clutch, you know, Youkilis and Justice, they all had pretty good power, at least against one-handedness of pitcher, and this David Wright is just a little bit low on that for me, so that's why he's not S, but yet again, a really good card. Next up is Billy Wagner, who I guess I'm gonna rate S+. This is probably the best left-handed reliever in the game. This is gonna be a must pickup. You're going to see this card in every single bullpen basically moving forward, and yeah, just potentially the best card in the entire game at its position, which is crazy. crazy. And finally, we have Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who I'm gonna rate in B tier. The hitting stats are okay, but they don't really blow me away, and then the 60 fielding is pretty rough. I just don't think this card has the offensive attributes to make up for his poor defense. So as you're working through the NL East, I think without a doubt your first pickup should be Billy Wagner. After that, I would go with Giancarlo Stanton. Then I would pick between David Justice and David Wright, and finally I would round it out with Vladimir Guerrero Sr. This is a little extra nugget outside of the card ratings that I thought I should include. For the NL East division and the AL West divisions, the only pitcher cards available are relievers. This means that the pitcher missions are actually way shorter than the other divisions. As you can see, I'm under single player missions, and there's a repeatable mission for 3 innings pitched against the computer with Billy Wagner, and it gives you 10,000 TA. So not only should you take Billy Wagner first because the card is so good, but if you do take him first, you can actually just load into a play versus CPU game, throw Billy Wagner for 3 innings. You can literally bunt when you're on offense. The game will probably take 5 to 7 minutes, and you back out, you get 10,000 TA, and you can just do that over and over. You could throw 3 innings while bunting and quit 4 times, and you're already at the next boss pack. So by taking the reliever first in the reliever only divisions, you're going to be able to speed up your progress a lot just by doing this mission over and over. It doesn't work in divisions that also have starting pitchers because the innings pitch mission is 9 instead of 3. Like I said, the divisions for this are the NL East and the AL West. We just went over the NL East, and Billy Wagner should be your first pick anyway, but this is a little boost. Next is the AL Central and Jose Abreu, who I'm also going to rate S. These are just really good hitting stats for a launch day 89 overall. I told you all I want my offense instead of my defense at the corner infield, and this card gives that to me. I will say no quirks though, so that's something to keep in mind. Next is Emmanuel Clase, who's a little bit of a weird one to evaluate. Bullpen is one of the hardest things to construct right when the game comes out, so I think most people are going to be picking up this card anyway, but in my experience, I find Emmanuel Clase pretty hard to pitch with and pretty easy to hit. If you're pitching to someone that can hit the outlier cutter, you basically have nothing to fall back on. So that's why I'm only going to rate this card in A tier. But regardless, you have 8 bullpen slots to fill out with somebody, so I'm sure it's going to be worth adding anyway. Next is Pudge Rodriguez, who I'm rating in B tier. I personally can never hit with Pudge cards. Great contact and clutch from this one, but just no pop. And honestly, I thought the defense would be a little better for an Ivan Rodriguez card. Just an okay catcher for me. I think there's better options in Team Affinity. Next is Zach Greinke, who I'm also going to rate in B tier. This is just like a normal, straightforward, like vanilla starting pitcher. Pretty on par hits per 9 and K per 9. Pretty on par pitch mix. Nothing exciting, but nothing bad really. I do like Zach Greinke in general, but nothing about this card really pops off the page. And finally, we have Brian Dozier, new legend. I'm going to rate him A. Historically, this card has had an amazing swing back when he was a current player. A lot of power for a middle infielder too. The one thing that concerns me about this card is 57 clutch. I think that's pretty low for a card that you're going to be looking for offensive production from. Again, it's not always going to be an issue because there's got to be runners in scoring position for that to be active, but it's something to think about and a reason I didn't put him in S tier. So for this division, even though I rated Jose Abreu higher, I would actually take Emmanuel Clase first. Jose Abreu is a weird one because he is an S tier first baseman for me, but your priorities might be different, and obviously first base is like one of the most popular positions. There's plenty of first basemen you could take that are on par with Jose Abreu, so you don't necessarily need to take him first. So I'd say if Jose Abreu is going to be your first baseman, I'd take him second, and if he's not really that interesting to you, I'd actually go with Zach Greinke second. You do need 5 starting pitchers at the end of the day, so getting someone like Greinke in the back end of your rotation is not the worst. Then after that, I'd go with Dozier, and finally I'd go with Pudge last. On to the NL Central now, and Sammy Sosa, who is surprisingly kind of like a defensive pick. Good defensive stats and good speed, but the contact is pretty low. He does have 103 clutch to make up for it. I think this is an A tier outfielder for where we're at right now. I think it's a good card. Next is Joey Votto, who I'm also going to rate in A tier. Another card that's got good clutch, that's pulling up low contact, so that's good. Max power versus right, which is pretty crazy, but I think overall from a first baseman, I'd like a little bit better hitting stats, especially against lefties. Next is Yasmani Grandal from the Brewers, who is S tier. You're getting low contact with this card, but you're also getting a switch hitting catcher with pop. That is good enough for me this early on in the game cycle. The community seems to love Yasmani Grandal's swing every year too. The one thing is he's insanely slow. He will turn doubles into singles, but there's just no way I can't say this card is an S. Next is AJ Burnett, who I'm actually going to give the first C tier rating to in this video. Pretty average attributes in terms of per 9s, and the pitch mix is just really bad. Sinker, 4-seam at the exact same speed, knuckle curve, and circle change. This card is going to be basically forced to throw sinker changeup for like 80% of your pitches, and at that point you're basically pitching with a relief pitcher in terms terms of repertoire. So I actually think this is a pretty bad card. And finally, we have Jack Flaherty, who I rate in B tier. Pretty similar to Greinke in that a lot of it is just okay. His hits per 9 is pretty high actually for where we're at, but I find Jack Flaherty's delivery to be pretty easy to read and his pitch mix is pretty generic. So I just think he's an okay pitcher and that's why I put him in B tier. So from this division, I would definitely go with Yasmani Grandal first, and then after that I would choose between Sammy Sosa and Joey Votto. After that I would go with Jack Flaherty, and then finally I would take AJ Burnett last. On to the AL West now, and another card that I think is extremely underrated in this Team Affinity, Carlos Correa. This card is actually closer than you might think to the 93 Ernie Banks from the World Series rewards. He's way behind in power versus right, but he's actually better against lefties. Max contact left and also 107 clutch is going to pull up that 88 contact right, which is already not that bad. And Correa actually has a new swing this year in game. He's got a two-handed slap swing now, which historically has been one of the best swings in the game. This card is undoubtedly an S tier card for me, and I think probably one of the best shortstops available at all right now. Next is Raisel Iglesias, who I think is maybe one of the most disappointing cards in the set. 87 hits per 9 for a relief pitcher. When you compare it to other relief pitchers in the game, it's actually really low. And again, kind of the same thing with AJ Burnett, really only 2 speeds. At least this card has a slider. As far as relief pitchers go, I think this is a B tier card. Next is Ricky Henderson, who I'm also rating in B tier. Outside of the speed, this card is just very average. This card turns into a pretty good defensive replacement or just defensive outfielder in general if you want to get him to parallel 2, but overall I don't think most people will. This is a card I think it makes sense to pass on. Next is Mitch Haniger, who I'm gonna also rate in S tier. We've said it with a lot of cards so far, but the clutch is big. 95-103 stock versus lefties is really good at this point. And overall, I just think Mitch Haniger cards play really well. The silver fielding with 52 speed might give you some trouble, but those are the choices you're gonna have to make when the overalls are this low. Overall, I think this is an amazing card. And finally, we have Jose Leclerc, who I'm rating in S tier. Can't really go wrong with an almost maxed out hits per 9 and 5 solid pitches around launch. The differences between this card and Raisel Iglesias are very apparent, and I think you're going to be seeing this card in a lot of bullpens moving forward. So for the AL West, because of the reasons I mentioned earlier with the relief pitcher missions, I would actually suggest taking Jose Leclerc first. That way you can work on that repeatable mission and get easy progress. After that, I would go with Carlos Correa for sure. Then I would go with Mitch Haniger for sure. And finally, I would round it out with Ricky Henderson and Raisel Iglesias, whichever one you want. The last division is the NL West, which actually has some really good cards. This is one of them. I'd rate this Brandon Webb card in A tier. Per 9s are good. Pitch mix is pretty good. They gave him a slider this year. This is a finesse pitcher who's gonna dot and should be pretty reliable for you early on. Typically, Brandon Webb cards have really low hits per 9, so I was really excited to see that this one has 90. I think this is one of the better starting pitcher options from Team Affinity and definitely a good card. Next is Charlie Blackmon, who I have to rate in high A tier and not S tier just because of the defense, but the hitting is crazy. Basically 100 contact versus both sides stock, and then also 125 clutch, 88 power right, good enough power left. Charlie Blackmon's swing is always good. If you're looking for a DH or if you really want to take some risks in the corner outfield, this card might be worth a look. High A tier card for me. Next is Justin Turner, who is definitely an S tier card for me and one of the best cards in Team Affinity. Another card that's really underrated. Big flaw of this card, 66 contact. Again, in the context of the rest of the game, that's really actually not that low, but look at the attributes versus lefties. 106, 125 is insane for where we're at. There's a ton of meta lefty starting pitchers in the game right now. We've got Randy, we've got Donaldson. You might see some Johan Santana sometimes. Babe Ruth is a collection reward, and even when he's hitting against righties, this card brings 95 power to the table. I also love the positional versatility, although I would definitely consider this card a corner infielder. Playing him at second base or shortstop with that defense and speed is going to be really rough. But this is one of the best hitters in Team Affinity and a must pick up. This is an S tier card. On to Tony Gwynn now, who I'm rating in B tier. This is just everything you'd expect out of an 89 Tony Gwynn card, just not enough power, and that's why he's in B tier. And finally, we have the last card, which is Brandon Crawford, who I'm rating in high A tier. If the hitting stats versus lefties were a little bit better, I'd put him in S for sure, but this is a really solid card all around, and again, 116 clutch. A lot of guys with big clutch in this Team Affinity. Solid defense too at short, although the speed is going to kill you sometimes. Again, just a good card. For the NL West, I would absolutely take Justin Turner first. Then after that, I would actually go with Brandon Webb to get some rotation depth, and this is one of the better starting pitchers you can get from Team Affinity. After that, I would either go with Charlie Blackmon or Brandon Crawford, whichever position you feel like you need. And finally, I would take Tony Gwynn last. So that's going to do it for the video. That's all 30 Team Affinity bosses rated. I hope this was helpful for you all. I hope it gives you some direction as you're working your way through these. If it wasn't apparent from the ratings, there's so many good cards in this set. You can set yourself up really nice with a really good squad. And the lower overalls are fun. You have to make some choices sometimes. Appreciate you all watching. As always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time.